Hey guys, thank you so much. I like to imitate my heroes. A couple of my heroes are some guys that are probably pretty familiar to you, Charlie Meadows and John Missioner. So I've often joked that I'm going to start wearing overalls and sandals to all my political stuff. Well, I got a new hero. He's another one of these Davids, and his name's Dan Fisher. But there's a problem. I cannot for the life of me imitate that guy's goofy hairdo. First of all, I just want to thank all of you guys for devoting your weekend to fighting the sin of abortion. I'm so encouraged to look across this room and see 1,000 Davids ready to go up against 1,000 Goliaths. I'm so encouraged because I know that I serve a one-stone God who has a track record of using the most insignificant people for the most Herculean tasks of their time. I'm so encouraged because I know that every one of you are prepared to answer the lies of the enemy with that question, who even is this hotshot, uncircumcised Philistine who dares to defy the armies of the only true, holy, living God who holds the whole world in his hands? This day, God will deliver this giant into our hands, and we will strike him down, because greater is he who is in us than he who is in the world. Let's get out there. Let's get out there and tell the world that the time for justice is now, and the candidate to inaugurate a return to justice is Dan Fisher. Now, as we proclaim this message, there are going to be people object, well, Dan Fisher's a single-issue candidate. Like, the only issue he's concerned about is abortion. Now, that's what I want to talk about this afternoon. So let's just ask the question, a couple questions. First of all, is Dan Fisher a single-issue candidate? And second of all, if he's not a single-issue candidate, and if there are other issues that matter, why is he talking so much about abortion? Why is it such a big deal? Why is his emphasis on the abolition of abortion any more important or righteous than Gary Richardson's emphasis on the abolition of the Turnpike Authority, for example? So first of all, is Dan Fisher a single-issue candidate? Well, the short answer is absolutely not. He talks about other issues all the time. The fact that he prioritizes the abolition of abortion doesn't preclude him from the ability to address other issues. And in fact, he addresses a litany of governmental issues all the time, including education, the Second Amendment, gun rights, forced vaccination, criminal justice reform, and a host of other issues. So we can just be clear on that. No, Dan Fisher's not a single-issue candidate. That's just a made-up story. Okay, so now that we're good on that, we can move on to the bigger question, which is, why is abortion such a big deal? Why isn't he talking more about how to mechanically run the government? I mean, don't we need more of a business sense approach at this point in our state's history? Well, that really depends on what you believe about the purpose of government. You can take really two views. You can take more of the mechanical, utilitarian view, or you can take more of the philosophical, human rights view. So let's just talk about both real quick. First of all, you can take the mechanical, utilitarian view that Gary Richardson takes, which is that the purpose of government is to take care of our core functions. Now, on the surface, that sounds great. It sounds like he supports limited government, and maybe he does. But here's the problem. How do we determine what is or isn't a core function? Who decides? I mean, Obama decided that taking your money to pay for other people's health care was a core function of government. Senator Irvin Yen over at 23rd and Lincoln wants you to believe that forced vaccination is a core function of government. Are you okay with that? I mean, mechanics, if not guided by the proper moral underpinning, can go awry really quickly. Let's just be real for a second. The Nazis were just more running the government mechanically. They were trying to be as efficient as possible. They unfortunately didn't have that proper moral underpinning that would prevent heinous abuses of power and slaughter of 6 million children. And guess what? Evidently, we've lost that moral underpinning too, because now we have a Holocaust 10 times worse on our hands. Now, we've probably all heard the phrase, ideas have consequences. Until we change our ideas, the consequences aren't going to change. In so much as we try to mechanically improve things without a major ideological overhaul, we're going to continue to get the same ridiculous results over and over and over again. It's like watering the leaves of a tree. If a tree is dehydrated, no matter how beautiful it may be to watch the water cascade down the leaves, it's not going to help anything in the long run. We've got to get to the roots. And that's what we've got to do with government here in Oklahoma. We've got to get the proper philosophy, which begs the question, what then is the proper philosophy? Which leads us to our second consideration, the philosophical human rights approach to the purpose of government. Now, this is the approach that the Founding Fathers took, and they articulated it like this. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Now, in other writings, the founders defined the pursuit of happiness as the right to one's own property. So we can say that the three basic human rights are life, liberty, and property. Now, why would the founders so limit the scope of government? Why would they relegate the functions of government to only those things which are absolutely necessary to protect the people's life, liberty, and property? Why would they establish a government as a convention of the governed? Well, there's really only one good explanation, and it goes like this. Human rights are transcendent. That is, they've existed from the beginning of time, from the Garden of Eden, as part of God's creative work. Since we were created by God and are sustained by God, God has a claim on our lives that no man has any right to interfere with. He doesn't have the right to take our lives or interfere with our rights. So our rights are really just an extension of God's creative claim in our lives. Now, we also know from Romans 13 that the purpose of government is to protect good and punish evil. But governments are just compositions of men. They're just organizations of human beings created in the image of God with the same exact rights that you and I have, but nothing more. They are no more entitled to human rights than you and I are. So they have no right to take our rights, no pun intended. Okay, so really that's why government is a convention of the governed, because it is bound by the transcendency of human rights. Human rights came first, civil government came second. Civil government is subservient to civil rights. So the only proper function of government is that which pertains to the protection of life, liberty, and property. Now at this point, we just have to ask a question. Is the Oklahoma state government doing a good job of adequately protecting our rights? I'm sorry, what was that? No, I don't think they are either. Now raise your hand or shout or do whatever you want to do if you believe that the Oklahoma government in some way, at some point in time, in some form or fashion, is actually abrogating or threatening all three basic human rights. Yeah, I tend to agree. Now, if that's the purpose of government, to protect life, liberty, and property, there are really just a few things that need to fundamentally change in order to realign government with its proper purpose. We have got to abolish abortion to ensure that the right to life is protected. We have got to assert state sovereignty to ensure that the people's right to liberty is not abrogated. We have got to audit everything to make sure that their property is not stolen or squandered for selfish reasons. And we have got to ensure that proper government that stays within its bounds and never threatens or burdens the people or their liberty. Now here's the other thing. If that's the purpose of government, to protect life, liberty, and property, then there is no more pressing issue than the issue of abortion. Let's just think about it for a second. What is the one single legal practice that abrogates all three basic human rights in Oklahoma? Is it high tolls? Well, no. The most you could maybe argue is that high tolls take your money, so they deprive you of your right to your property, or maybe your liberty, but they don't take your life. So no. Is it maybe the legislative process? Maybe we just need to reform the legislative process? No. Again, the legislative process doesn't walk up to legislators and say, we hereby force you to run this piece of legislation that's going to violate human rights. So it's not the process's fault. When we analyze it in the grand scheme of things, the only legal practice that abrogates all three human rights is abortion. Think about it. If your right to life is taken, all other rights are in question. If you're dead, you don't even have the opportunity or the ability to exercise your right to liberty or property. At that point, your only property is a casket. So Dan Fisher is absolutely correct to prioritize the abolition of abortion over every other governmental issue in the works. And so should every other candidate. So why aren't they? Well, unfortunately, they have fundamentally failed to properly analyze the situation in Oklahoma and evaluate their priorities. Until we end this Holocaust, nothing's going to change. If our right to life is not secure, every basic human right, indeed every human right, is in jeopardy. Now, there's something that I think we need to come to grips with at this point, because it's easy to think that the problems are out there, that they're in that governmental building at 23rd and Lincoln or the county seat or wherever we think it is. But it's very difficult to view these problems as hometown, as heart issues, backyard issues. But if we're going to be honest with ourselves, we have to admit that that's exactly what they are. Because if abortion is the single most important issue in our nation, for 45 years, while a monstrous Holocaust has raged through our land, we've sat on our hands. I mean, we may have agitated for certain human rights, like, for example, parental choice or school choice or gun rights. All good things, very good things, but things that at the end of the day lull us in our comfort while we ignore the cries of the helpless. We sing about a life-giving God every Sunday while ignoring the lives of the voiceless as they're torn apart and burned alive by heartless, selfish people. If that's the state of apathy that we're in, then we are the heartless, selfish ones. We've got to realize that Christ was butchered for us. He was torn apart. He died for each and every one of us. But what's more, he was butchered for every single one of the 60 million babies that we've butchered over the last 45 years. He suffered the ignominy, the pain, the reproach, the absolutely unthinkable for those our culture calls fetuses. And somehow we think it's okay to sit idly by and just selfishly enjoy all the salvation for ourselves. Friends, for 45 years, the blood of innocent human beings has drenched our hands. And we try to hide our hands behind our back and say, am I my brother's keeper? God is high and holy. He is just and infinitely perfect. His holiness is insulted. We've committed treason against the Almighty. He will not hold us guiltless. He will not acquit us of the crime of indifference. Repentance is due, my friends. It is time that we gave serious consideration to the state of our own souls in relation to this egregious Holocaust. It is time to repent. What are we going to do? How are we going to respond going forward? That's what we're going to consider the rest of this evening. Thank you, and God bless you.